It has been quite a long time since I've done a video, and this topic bothers me so much, I had to do a video about it. And the topic is not doing favors in real estate. So to give some background, I'm an attorney in Los Angeles, so most of my cases, at this point all my cases, are within Los Angeles County. Los Angeles County has 88 sub-cities, but LA City is the biggest one. And so all of the cities have different underlying rules about landlord-tenant laws, and then there's state rules about landlord-tenant laws. And so there's an ongoing eviction moratorium that prevents a lot of landlords from gaining possession of units back or houses, residential tenancies are protected in many ways. So I get a lot of phone calls from people being like, this was temporary, I gave them super cheap rent, et cetera, et cetera. And so I want to stress in this video how not temporary doing favors are for people. And maybe I'll get a lot of flack for the video, but it's a very honest take from all of the cases that I see, all of the calls that I get. This is my takeaway: don't do favors with real estate. So to begin, when you have a house, a duplex, multiple units, an apartment, and you have the ability to let someone stay with you, understand you're subject to landlord-tenant laws. So if you don't want a landlord, don't landlord. And it's probably very great that you have this ability, that you have this opportunity, that you have, the means to help someone and give them temporary housing. But understand from the perspective of the person who needs the favor. They're protected and you're not. They can't afford their own housing and they're asking you to do them a favor and subsidize their housing. The trick about doing that is you're now enabling them to not move out, because people get really, really used to paying really cheap rent or no rent at all. That was highlighted during this entire pandemic when tenants, stopped paying rent. They got really, really used to not paying rent, and I've seen a lot of tenants, buy cars with their rent money and do a lot of things. There was definitely tenants impacted by COVID, but there was a lot of people who took advantage of the system. When you have a friend or a family member and they say, hey, I need a place to live temporarily, if you have an apartment, that's rent controlled. So once the person's in, it's very easy to get them in. It's very hard to get them out. And so many people call me and they go, the person won't leave. I need to sell the house. I need to sell the building. They won't leave. They won't leave. They won't take money, or they want an extreme amount of money. They want this or they want that. And I gave them really cheap rent and they're way under market. Well, when you put them in a rent controlled unit, what you said is their rent is the rent. So if the unit, let's say the market rent is $2,000 and you give it to them for $1,200, you're losing the $800 and you can't get it back if it's a rent controlled property, which is a lot of properties in Los Angeles. So now you're stuck, and they go out and they go, you tell someone, hey, this is not working, I need you to go. And they go look out in the world and say, well, I can't afford living anywhere else. Well, this was supposed to be temporary. Well, too bad, I can't leave. And that happens with friends and it happens with family all of the time. So if you want to do someone a favor and you want to let them move into your house, let them move into your apartment, into your duplex, whatever, understand you're making a much larger commitment to them than they are to you. And nothing is temporary. I don't care what anybody says. It's just temporary. It's only going to be a month. It's only going to be 3 months. So many people have told me it's temporary. It was supposed to be temporary and they've been there 10 years. It's supposed to be temporary and they've been there for 2 years. It's supposed to be temporary and they won't leave. It's supposed to be temporary, but I have to sell the house now and they won't go. And it creates a huge conflict between the person who has, ownership of the property and the person staying in it. And there's a direct conflict because the person staying in it doesn't want to leave. Moving is expensive, moving is time consuming, and rents are expensive. And here you are saying you could just stay here for really cheap rent. And then, a lot of times people will rent out like guest houses or garages, and they'll go, hey, just live here temporarily. Well, you can't do that if it's not legal. So if you're putting people in your garage and you're illegally converting it into a garage so they can stay temporarily, that's a problem. Because you're not supposed to be moving people into your garage if it's not a legally converted, like ADU. And so I caution people, when you have this like idea in your head, like, oh, I'm going to help my friend out, I'm going to help my family member out, it has blown up in so many people's faces. And yeah, a lot of people need help. A lot of people do struggle. Right now, rent's really high. People, it would be great to have the assistance. But if you can't handle that burden, then you shouldn't be putting yourself in that position. Because once you put someone in, like I've said, it's very, very hard to get them out. And there's far more tenant rights than there are landlord rights, especially in Los Angeles. And there's ongoing protections for tenants. So, I've seen it happen so many times with families being torn apart over it. With family members doing favors for friends and the friends won't leave, so now the families are in conflict, or just friendships falling apart over I did them a favor, now they won't leave, and they want all this money to go, and they have all these rights, and they're complaining about this, and we were on great terms and all of a sudden we weren't. So it's really, really tricky. And I'm very passionate about this topic because so many people mean well. So many people, especially people who own property, they work really hard to get property, and they think, oh, you know what, I'm going to go help someone out. And then a lot of times it blows up in their face. And it's an issue of perspective. The person who has the subsidized rent, which you're subsidizing it if you're giving it to them, cheaper than market. Oftentimes landlords will pay for the utilities. And then there's usually, a lot of times there's not even an agreement in place. It's just oral, and that gets very convoluted. But people who own real estate, by and large, mean well. And those are landlords. And they've taken a lot of the landlord-tenant dynamic and they've messed with it in the state, and they've made it really, really not friendly for property owners. And so if this is something that comes up, or someone asks you, hey, can I stay in your place temporarily? It's only going to be temporarily. You should really, really heavily consider looking into the kind of property that you have, the laws that you're subject to, and then understand, what's going on if there's an ongoing eviction moratorium in your area, and really look at the person's situation that's asking you for the favor. Do you really think it's going to be temporary? And you should assume it's not. And then if you can accept that reality, that this is probably going to be way longer than temporary, and you're willing to take that gamble and that sacrifice, then okay. But you have to accept that once you start this favor, you are then burdened with a lot of rules that apply to you that make it very, very hard to get the person out. Extremely, extremely hard, extremely expensive, and it takes a really long time. And so it's a very long-winded kind of scolding, but I hope people see this. And, from a tenant perspective, it sounds great to have someone help you, but, it's a huge burden on a landlord. But it falls on the landlord, well, you got yourself into this. You're stuck with it. You should have done your research. You should have known more. And a lot of tenants, which in this case are friends or family, can't really put themselves in the shoes of the owner because they feel like, well, I need the help, and why should I have to go? I have all these rights. And in that sense, once you start renting, a lot of the rights as the property owner can be taken away or severely diminished. And a tenant may understand that, and they, this friend or family member may get it, but a lot of the times they don't. And I know because people call me and they go, they just don't get it. It's like, well, it was tricky for you to do this in the first place. So don't do favors for friends and family if you don't know the risks of getting involved in that favor. And most definitely Don't be leasing out, garages or basements or places that are not suitable for habitable dwelling. In direct violation of many, many laws. Even if it's, temporary, even if it's, supposed to be a favor, you can get yourself in a lot of trouble and give yourself a lot of grief. Okay, that's it. That was all that I had for that. Hopefully this helps people have some sort of perspective, or, you see this and take into consideration before you decide to let someone move into your property. Thank you.